The eviction notice had been taped to the apartment door for 3 days before Elena Vasquez found the courage to tear it off. The paper was official, stamped, final, 30 days to vacate. The words blurred as she read them for the 7th time, standing in the hallway while her daughter Mia slept inside, unaware that their world was collapsing again. Elena was 31 years old, but the mirror showed someone older. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Hands roughened from double shifts at the diner, from scrubbing floors at the nursing home after her waitressing ended, from holding together a life that kept slipping through her fingers like water.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.
The manila envelope arrived on Thursday, delivered by a lawyer whose shoes cost more than Elena made in a month. He handed it to her at the diner during the lunch rush, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm Gerald Morrison, representing the estate of Marcus Blackwood. We need to discuss your inheritance." Elena had stared at him, spatula still in hand, bacon grease popping on the griddle behind her. "I don't know anyone named Marcus Blackwood. Your great-uncle. He passed 3 weeks ago, left specific instructions regarding you." Morrison glanced around the crowded diner, at the cracked vinyl booths and the customers shouting orders. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private." She'd told him to wait, finished her shift because she couldn't afford to lose the job, then met him in the parking lot. Her apron was still on, stained with ketchup and coffee. Morrison opened his briefcase with our hands that had never done manual labor. "Marcus Blackwood was your grandmother's brother, lost contact with the family in the 1970s, made his fortune in textiles, lost most of it in the 80s recession. He died alone in a nursing home in Lawrence, Massachusetts, left debts, medical bills, and one asset, a textile mill. Condemned, abandoned for 37 years. Elena's stomach had sunk, so he left me nothing, just debt." Morrison pulled out photographs. The mill was a corpse. 5 stories of red brick, windows shattered or boarded, roof caved in on the eastern side. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Vines had reclaimed the loading docks. It looked like something that should be demolished, not inherited. The property is worthless in its current condition. Environmental assessments show asbestos, lead paint, structural failure. Estimated cleanup cost is $300,000 minimum. Morrison's voice was clinical. "However, Massachusetts law requires the estate to transfer all assets before settling debts. This mill is legally yours if you want it. Purchase price, $1. $1 for a building that would cost $300,000 to make safe. $1 for another failure to add to Elena's collection." She should have said no, should have walked away from this poisoned gift. But something in those photographs caught her eye. The weaving floor, visible through a broken window. Massive looms sitting like sleeping giants, covered in decades of dust, but somehow still intact. Her grandmother had been a weaver before dementia took her memories. Had taught Elena the basics as a child. The rhythm of warp and weft, the patience required to create something beautiful from individual threads. This mill, these machines, they were connected to a past Elena had never known, a family history that predated her failures. "I'll take it." The words came out before she could stop them. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Vasquez, I should clarify. You'll be responsible for all liability. If someone gets hurt on the property, if environmental damage spreads, you're liable. This isn't an asset, it's a potential lawsuit." "I understand." Elena's jaw set with the stubbornness her ex-husband had called self-destructive. "I want it." She signed papers in Morrison's car, her signature scratchy across legal documents she barely understood. Paid $1 from the 17 she had in her wallet. Received a deed, a set of keys, and a folder thick with inspection reports that all said the same thing in different technical language. "This building is dying. Let it die." That night, Elena showed Mia the photographs. Her daughter was 9 years old, small for her age, with dark eyes that had learned to expect disappointment. The child studied the images with the serious concentration she brought to everything. "It's big." Mia's voice was careful, testing for emotional traps. "It's ours." Elena tried to inject hope into the words. "Or it will be. We just have to figure out what to do with it. Can we live there? Make it into a house? Maybe someday. Right now it's not safe. But it's something, baby. It's more than we had yesterday." Mia nodded, not quite believing, but wanting to. That night, Elena heard her daughter whispering to her stuffed rabbit, telling it about their building, their mill, their future. The hope in that small voice hurt worse than anything. The Facebook post went viral in the worst possible way. Elena's cousin Rita had meant well, sharing the story of Elena buying the mill with enthusiasm that read as delusion to everyone else. "Single mom invests in historic property." Within hours, the comments multiplied like bacteria. "She paid $1 for condemned property and thinks she's a businesswoman," one woman wrote. "This is why poor people stay poor. Bad decisions. That building should be demolished." Someone else added, "It's a hazard. She's going to get sued when a kid breaks in and gets hurt." Her sister Jennifer's comment appeared 3 hours later, and it was the one that made Elena's chest tighten. "Mom would be so disappointed. First the divorce, then losing the house. Now this. When are you going to stop making impulsive decisions and think about Mia?" Elena deleted the Facebook app from her phone, but the damage was done. Over the next week, she felt the judgment everywhere. At the diner, customers who'd been friendly suddenly looked at her with pity mixed with contempt. At Mia's school, other mothers whispered when she walked past. Even her landlord mentioned it when she dropped off the rent check. "Heard you bought some property up north." His tone suggested she'd been caught in a lie. "Funny how you've got money for real estate but can't pay rent on time." "I paid $1. Elena's voice came out defensive despite her efforts. "It's not what you think. Never is." He'd turned away, dismissing her. "Rent's due on the 1st, not the 3rd, not the 5th, the 1st. That night, Elena lay awake in the apartment she'd be evicted from in 23 days, listening to Mia's soft breathing and calculating impossible math. She had $900 in savings. The mill was 3 hours north. Even visiting it would cost gas money she couldn't spare. And for what? To confirm that she'd made another mistake? To prove Jennifer right? But something kept pulling at her. The weaving floor in those photographs. The looms that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. The connection to a great uncle she'd never met, but who'd chosen her specifically to receive this burden. Morrison had mentioned Marcus Blackwood made specific instructions regarding you. Why her? Why not Jennifer, who had a real job and a husband and stability? Why not Rita, who actually knew something about business? The drive to Lawrence took 4 hours because Elena's Toyota had a shimmy above 60 miles per hour that felt dangerous. Mia sat in the passenger seat with her homework, pretending to read but mostly staring out the window at the changing landscape. They left behind the familiar streets of Hartford, drove through small towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by progress, and finally arrived in Lawrence as the sun dropped toward the horizon. The mill sat on the edge of the Merrimack River, separated from the water by 100 yards of cracked pavement and dead grass. Elena pulled into what used to be the parking lot, now a maze of potholes and weeds pushing through asphalt. She killed the engine and they sat in silence, staring at the building that was somehow theirs. "It's bigger than the pictures." Mia's voice was small. "Yeah." Elena's throat closed. It was bigger and worse. The photographs hadn't captured the scale of decay. 5 stories of industrial architecture that had once represented prosperity and progress, now a monument to abandonment. The windows on the upper floors were gone completely, leaving dark holes that looked like empty eye sockets. The main entrance doors hung at angles, one completely off its hinges. The loading dock where trucks once delivered raw materials and collected finished textiles now hosted a homeless encampment.
If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this.
Elena could see tarps strung between support pillars, shopping carts lined up like a makeshift fence. Two men sat on milk crates near a barrel fire, watching her car with the wary attention of people who'd learned not to trust authority. Maybe we should come back another time. Mia's hand found Elena's. When there's more light, we're already here. Elena tried to sound confident. Let's just look at the outside today. Get a sense of what we're dealing with. They climbed out of the Toyota into October wind that came off the river like a cold slap. Elena had dressed for the weather, but Mia's jacket was too thin, outgrown last spring, but still the warmest thing she owned. The child tucked her hands into her sleeves and pressed close to Elena's side. The chain-link fence surrounding the property was more suggestion than barrier. Sections had been cut away, bent back to create entrances for whoever wanted access. Signs hung at irregular intervals. No trespassing. Danger, structural failure. Keep out by order of the city of Lawrence. All of them weathered and ignored. You're the new owner? A voice came from behind them. Elena spun, positioning herself between Mia and the stranger. One of the men from the loading dock had approached. He was maybe 50, wearing layers of clothing that suggested every shirt he owned at once. His face was weathered, but his eyes were clear. Yes. Elena kept her voice steady. Elena Vasquez, this is my daughter. The man studied them both, then nodded slowly. Marcus was good to us. Let us stay here without hassle. City tried to kick us out twice, but Marcus talked to them, said we were security, kept vandals from stripping the copper. His gaze shifted to Mia. You planning to tear it down? Sell it for scrap? I don't know what I'm planning, Elena admitted. I just inherited it. Place has history. The man gestured toward the mill. Your great-uncle used to talk about it, said his father worked here in the 40s when it was still producing, said there was something important inside that everyone forgot about. He never said what. Did Marcus go inside before he died? Not that I saw. He'd sit in his car sometimes staring at it for hours, like he was working up courage. The man turned back toward the loading dock. I'm Carl. Me and Tommy, we keep an eye on things. Make sure the really bad element doesn't move in. You want to look around? We'll keep watch. Thank you. Elena meant it for letting Marcus, for watching the place. Carl nodded and walked away. Elena watched him rejoin his companion at the barrel fire, saw them talking in low voices, glancing back occasionally, not threatening, protective maybe, or just curious about what this woman and her child were doing at an abandoned mill on a Friday evening. The main entrance was less dangerous than it looked. The doors hung open, but the frame was solid enough. Elena tested her weight on the threshold, feeling for soft spots in the wood that would indicate rot. It held. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The lobby had been grand once. Elena could see the bones of it through the decay, marble floors, though cracked and stained. A sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor, its banisters still intact, despite missing balusters. The ceiling soared 20 feet overhead, decorated with pressed tin panels that hung in places, revealing water-damaged plaster. Mia pointed to the wall behind where a reception desk once stood. Faded, painted letters spelled out Blackwood Textile Mills, Est, 1889. The paint was peeling, but the words remained. More than a century of history, compressed into a sign that nobody had seen in decades. They moved carefully, Elena testing each floorboard before putting her full weight down. The hallway beyond the lobby led deeper into the building, doorways opening onto offices that had been stripped of everything valuable. Desks overturned, filing cabinets emptied, papers scattered across floors until they decomposed into mulch. The smell was overwhelming, mold and rot and the sharp tang of animal urine. Something scurried in the walls. Rats, probably. Maybe raccoons. Elena's stomach turned, but she kept moving, following the hand-drawn map Morrison had included with the deed. The weaving floor was on the third level, accessible by either the main stairs or the freight elevator. The elevator was a death trap. The doors stood open, revealing a shaft that dropped into darkness. Elena aimed her flashlight down and saw water at the bottom, black and still. They took the stairs. Each step groaned under their weight. The staircase had held for 37 years of abandonment, but Elena felt the instability. Some stairs had rotted through, leaving gaps that required careful navigation. She went first, testing each step before letting Mia follow, hyper-aware of the danger she was leading her daughter into. What kind of mother brought her child into a condemned building? The kind who was desperate, the kind who'd paid $1 for a miracle and was trying to justify the investment. The third floor opened onto a space so vast it stole Elena's breath. The weaving floor. The photographs hadn't captured the scale. It stretched the entire length of the building, at least 200 feet, with a ceiling 2 stories high supported by cast iron pillars, and filling that space, sitting silent and massive, were the looms. 30 of them, maybe 40. Elena couldn't count them all in the dim light from her phone. They stood in rows, these industrial giants from another era. Each one was 12 feet wide and 20 feet long, made of cast iron frames and wooden components that had somehow survived decades of exposure. Rust covered the metal parts. Dust blanketed everything in layers so thick it looked like snow, but they were intact. Against all logic, against the water damage and exposure and time, these machines remained. Not functional, probably, but present, real, proof that something of value had been left behind when everyone else walked away. Mia wandered between the looms, her small form dwarfed by their size. She reached out to touch one, her finger leaving a trail in the dust. "Mama, what did they make here?" "Fabric. Textiles." Elena moved closer to examine one of the looms. These machines would weave threads into cloth, cotton, wool, silk, whatever people needed. "Your great-great-grandfather worked here. Did he make our clothes?" The question was innocent, but it landed hard. The idea that their family had once created things of value had contributed to the world in tangible ways. Now Elena could barely afford to keep Mia in shoes that fit. Maybe. Elena's voice was thick. Back then, yeah, maybe he made fabric that became someone's favorite dress or a soldier's uniform or a baby's blanket. That's nice, making things people need. Mia turned in a slow circle, taking in the abandoned floor. "Can we fix these? Make them work again?" "I don't know, baby. It would cost." Elena stopped, calculating numbers that made her dizzy. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands, just to make the building safe, let alone restore the machinery. She turned to leave, to escape this monument to impossible dreams, and her foot caught on something. She stumbled, catching herself against a loom. Her hand broke through what she'd thought was floor, but was actually layers of fabric, rotted fabric, paper-thin and delicate, stacked on wooden pallets and covered with canvas tarps that had long since failed their protective purpose. Elena pulled her hand back, seeing her palm covered in dust and threads. She aimed her phone's flashlight down at what she'd uncovered. More fabric beneath, layers of it, compressed by decades of weight into a solid mass. The colors were muted by grime, but she could see patterns, geometric designs, floral motifs, something that looked like writing, though in a language she didn't recognize. "Careful," she pulled Mia back from the edge. "There's a pit here, storage maybe, filled with old fabric. Is it worth anything?" Mia's voice held hope that hurt to hear. "Probably not. It's been rotting for 40 years. But Elena couldn't quite look away. Something about the patterns visible through the dirt drew her attention. These weren't simple designs. They were intricate, woven with a skill that suggested artisanship beyond basic textile production. She crouched at the edge of the storage pit, using her phone's light to examine the exposed fabric more carefully. The weave was incredibly dense, thousands of threads per inch, creating images that looked almost three-dimensional. In one section, she could make out what appeared to be a human figure, rendered in threads with such detail that individual facial features were visible. "Mama, look!" Mia had found another area where the floor covering had collapsed. This one revealed fabric in better condition, protected by multiple layers of canvas. The colors here were brighter, deep blues and rich reds, gold threading that caught the light. Elena's hands shook as she pulled away more of the covering. Beneath the top layer was another piece, and beneath that, another, each one different, each one woven with patterns that grew more complex as she uncovered them. These weren't just textiles. These were tapestries, the kind of work that took months or years to complete, the kind of art that museums displayed behind glass. She pulled out her phone and searched valuable tapestries. The results made her breath catch. Medieval tapestries sold for millions. Renaissance pieces commanded 8 figures at auction. Even 19th century work could bring 6 figures if the quality was exceptional. But these couldn't be that valuable. They'd been abandoned in a mill for decades, left to rot in environmental conditions that should have destroyed them. Nobody left treasures in condemned buildings. Except someone had. Marcus Blackwood had kept this mill, had paid taxes on worthless property for 37 years, had given specific instructions that it should go to Elena, had told Carl there was something important inside that everyone forgot about. "We need to go." Elena's voice came out harsh. She grabbed Mia's hand, pulling her daughter toward the stairs. Her mind raced with possibilities she didn't dare voice. They needed expert opinion, needed authentication, needed to understand what she'd just found. In the car, driving too fast down dark roads, back toward Hartford, Elena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mia had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted by the adventure. Elena glanced at her daughter's peaceful face and felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper. If the tapestries were valuable, if they were worth even a fraction of what museum pieces commanded, everything would change. No more evictions. No more choosing between rent and groceries. No more watching Mia outgrow clothes they couldn't afford to replace. But if Elena was wrong, if this was just another failure in a long line of desperate hopes, she'd have dragged her daughter 3 hours north to stare at trash in a condemned building. Would have proven Jennifer right. Would have wasted the last of her money and time on a fantasy. The eviction notice was still taped to the apartment door when they got home at midnight. 20 days remaining. Elena tore it down and threw it in the trash, then pulled it back out and smoothed it carefully. Denial wouldn't make problems disappear. She opened her laptop, an ancient machine that took 5 minutes to boot up, and began researching. Textile authentication, historical tapestries, abandoned mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, Blackwood Textile Mills, Marcus Blackwood. The search results for the mills showed a thriving business from 1889 through 1971. Census records listed over 200 employees at its peak. Newspaper archives documented labor disputes, a fire in 1934 that destroyed part of the building, and finally the closure in 1971 when foreign competition made domestic production unprofitable. But there was nothing about tapestries. Nothing about artistic production. The mill had manufactured commercial textiles, sheets, towels, basic cotton goods, the kind of industrial work that kept America clothed but didn't create museum pieces. Elena found Marcus Blackwood's obituary, died at 87 in a nursing home, survived by no immediate family. His father, Richard Blackwood, had been the mill's final owner, had locked the doors in 1971 and walked away, leaving equipment and inventory to decay rather than selling it for scrap. Why? Why leave valuable machinery to rust? Why abandon a building that could have been sold or repurposed? Unless Richard Blackwood had been protecting something, hiding something, waiting for the right person to find it. At 3 in the morning, Elena finally found a reference that made sense of the pieces. A newspaper article from 1945, buried in the Hartford Courant archives. Local mill secures contract for specialized textiles. The article described Blackwood textile mills receiving a government contract to reproduce historical tapestries for diplomatic gifts. The work required master weavers brought in from Europe. The article included a quote from Richard Blackwood: "We're honored to recreate pieces that represent centuries of artistic achievement. These reproductions will help preserve history that might otherwise be lost." Reproductions, not originals. Elena's hope deflated slightly, but even high-quality reproductions of valuable tapestries could be worth something. And if they'd been created by master weavers in the 40s, if they'd been made for government contracts, they might have historical value beyond their artistic merit. She needed an expert, someone who could examine the tapestries and tell her if they were worth saving or if she should walk away. But experts cost money Elena didn't have. And even if she found someone willing to look for free, how would she transport the tapestries? They were massive, likely fragile, definitely contaminated with decades of dirt and mold. The answer came from an unexpected source. Elena posted a message in a textile history Facebook group at 4 in the morning, too exhausted to consider the wisdom of announcing her discovery to strangers. Found what appear to be historical tapestries in abandoned mill. Need authentication, looking for expert in the New England area, willing to do preliminary assessment. By the time she woke up at noon, having slept through her alarm and missed her diner shift, the post had 63 responses. Most were skeptical. A few were outright insulting, but one stood out. Dr. Sarah Chen, professor of textile history at Boston University. Her message was professional and direct. "I'd be happy to do a preliminary examination, no charge for initial assessment. If the pieces are what you think they are, we can discuss next steps. I'm available tomorrow afternoon if you can provide the address." Elena responded immediately, fingers trembling as she typed. Sent the mill's address. Arranged to meet Dr. Chen at 2 p.m. Then she called the diner to apologize for missing her shift, knowing she'd probably be fired. Called the nursing home to say she couldn't make her evening shift either. Burned both jobs in pursuit of a dream that might be delusion. Jennifer called that evening, her voice tight with that particular blend of concern and condescension that defined their relationship. "Rita told me you went to see the mill. Are you insane? That building should be demolished, not explored. You could have been hurt. Mia could have been hurt. We were careful." Elena kept her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. "Careful? There's no careful in a condemned building." Jennifer's judgment came through clearly. "You're making horrible decisions, Elena. First buying that property, now taking Mia into it. I'm seriously considering calling CPS. The threat hung between them. Child Protective Services, the ultimate weapon of concerned relatives." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "You do what you think is right, but I'm taking care of my daughter just fine, are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're dragging her deeper into poverty with every impulsive choice. The shop, the divorce, now this mill. When are you going to accept that you're not a businesswoman? You're a waitress who got lucky marrying above her station, and even that you couldn't hold together." Elena hung up. She turned off her phone, sat in the dark apartment and let herself break quietly, crying without sound so Mia wouldn't hear from the bedroom. The truth was, Jennifer wasn't entirely wrong. Elena had made bad decisions, had married David because he had stability and a degree and parents who paid for things, had tried to be the person he needed instead of discovering who she actually was. The divorce had been his idea, but the failure had been mutual. Two people who should never have married, producing a child who deserved better than their confusion, and the mill, buying it, had been impulse. But walking away from it now felt impossible. not because of money or pride, because something in those tapestries called to her. Her grandmother's hands had known this work, had created beauty from thread and patience. That knowledge lived in Elena's genetic memory, pulling her toward something she didn't fully understand. Dr. Chen arrived in a sensible Subaru wagon with Massachusetts plates. She was 40-something, wearing practical clothing and carrying a bag of equipment that suggested this wasn't her first textile investigation. Elena met her in the mill's parking lot, where Carl and Tommy were watching from their usual spot by the barrel fire. "Mrs. Vasquez?" Dr. Chen extended her hand. "Sarah, thank you for reaching out." They walked through the mill together, Elena leading with her phone's flashlight while Dr. Chen used a professional work light that threw bright beams across the abandoned spaces. Mia had stayed in the car, reading, trusting that her mother knew what she was doing, even when Elena herself wasn't sure. The weaving floor looked different in daylight, filtering through broken windows, less mysterious, more dangerous. The structural damage was more visible. Sections of floor had rotted through completely. The ceiling showed water damage and sagging that suggested imminent collapse. Dr. Chen moved carefully, testing each step, professional assessment taking over as she cataloged hazards. "This building is a death trap. The city should have demolished it years ago. They never had the budget." Elena gestured toward the looms, "And maybe nobody wanted to destroy these machines. They're not technically valuable, but they're historically significant." Dr. Chen examined the nearest loom with professional interest. Crompton and Knowles, probably 1910s or 20s. Common industrial models. She ran her hand along the frame, her touch reverent despite the rust and decay. But yes, historically important. These represent American industrial capacity at its peak. Elena led her to the storage pit where the tapestries lay. In daylight, the fabric looked even more impressive. The sections she'd uncovered showed intricate scenes, medieval tournaments with knights in armor, biblical scenes with figures in flowing robes, landscapes with castles and mountains rendered in thousands of colored threads. Dr. Chen went very still. She set down her bag slowly, as if sudden movement might make the tapestries disappear. Then she pulled out gloves and a magnifying glass and crouched at the edge of the pit. 15 minutes passed in silence. Dr. Chen examined threads, studied weave patterns, took photographs with a camera that cost more than Elena's car. Finally, she sat back on her heels and turned to Elena with an expression that mixed awe and disbelief. "Where did you say these came from?" Her voice was carefully controlled. "They were already here." "In the mill." Elena's stomach clenched. "Are they valuable?" Dr. Chen pulled off her gloves slowly. "Mrs. Vasquez, I need to be very clear about what I'm seeing. These are not reproductions. These are original European tapestries, likely 15th or 16th century. The weave density, the dye quality, the technical execution, this is pre-industrial work. That's impossible." Elena's world tilted. This was a commercial mill. They made sheets and towels, and during World War II, they apparently stored something else. Dr. Chen gestured at the tapestries. Museums and private collectors moved art out of Europe when the Nazis invaded. Valuable pieces were shipped to America for safekeeping. Some of those pieces were never recovered, never returned to their owners. "You think these were stolen?" The possibility made Elena's blood run cold. "I think these were protected. Whether they were stolen depends on circumstances I can't determine from visual examination alone." Dr. Chen pulled out her phone. "But I can tell you with reasonable certainty that what you have here is worth significantly more than the building containing it. I need to make some calls. We need authentication, provenance, research, professional conservation assessment." "How much more?" Elena's voice barely worked. Dr. Chen met her eyes. "If these are what I think they are, if they're documented pieces from the Monuments Men era, pieces that disappeared during the war, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars." The number didn't make sense. Hundreds of millions. That was nation-state money, museum collection money, not numbers that applied to single mothers living in apartments with eviction notices. But Dr. Chen was already making calls, speaking in rapid technical language to colleagues, describing weave patterns and subject matter and conservation conditions, snapping photographs and sending them, coordinating authentication processes that would unfold over days or weeks. Elena walked to the window and stared out at the Merrimack River. Somewhere across that water, her daughter sat in a car reading a book, unaware that their lives had just changed. That the building everyone mocked her for buying might contain enough wealth to solve every problem they'd ever faced. Or it might be stolen art, property of museums or families who'd been forced to flee Europe 80 years ago. In which case, Elena would have to return it, would have to walk away from the fortune with nothing but another failure. Dr. Chen appeared beside her. "I've contacted the FBI's art crime team. They'll want to investigate, determine provenance before any sale can proceed. That process could take months, maybe years. And in the meantime," Elena's voice was hollow, "in the meantime, we secure this site, get professional conservation assessment, document everything. And you," Dr. Chen's expression was gentle, "you get a lawyer, a very good lawyer." The story broke 3 days later. Someone from Dr. Chen's calls had talked to a journalist. The Boston Globe ran it on the front page. "Abandoned mill may hold Nazi-era art treasure." Within hours, it was national news. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all running segments about the single mother who'd bought a condemned building for $1 and found potentially hundreds of millions in tapestries. Elena's phone, which she'd turned back on, exploded with notifications. Reporters requesting interviews, lawyers offering services, family members she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly concerned about her well-being. Jennifer called 4 times, her messages shifting from anger to wounded confusion to tentative reconciliation. But the message that hurt most came from David, her ex-husband. His text was brief and cutting. "Of course you'd stumble into money after I left. Let me know when you want to discuss increasing Mia's child support, or maybe decreasing mine since you're about to be rich." The assumption stung that she was already wealthy, that the tapestries were hers to keep, that salvation was certain. Nobody seemed to understand that she might lose everything, that the FBI investigation could determine the tapestries were stolen property, that even if they weren't, the authentication and legal processes could drain any eventual sale price. And underneath all of that, Elena carried a deeper fear that she didn't deserve this, that somehow her lifetime of small failures disqualified her from massive success, that the universe would correct this error and leave her back where she started, but with even more debt and humiliation. The FBI arrived on day 5. 2 agents in suits that screamed federal authority. They cordoned off the mill with actual crime scene tape, brought in a mobile forensics unit and textile experts who examined every inch of the storage pit. Elena was questioned for 6 hours. Where did Marcus Blackwood acquire these pieces? How long had they been in the mill? Did she have any documentation of ownership or provenance? She answered what she could, which was almost nothing. Marcus was dead. His father Richard was long dead. Any records that might have explained the tapestry's presence had been lost to time and decay. On day 8, the art crime team held a press conference. Special Agent Victoria Martinez stood in front of cameras and read from prepared notes. The tapestries discovered in the Blackwood Mill are authentic European works from the 15th and 16th centuries. Preliminary analysis suggests they were among items moved to America during World War II for protection from Nazi looting. We are working with international museums and the National Archives to determine rightful ownership. She paused, and the next words changed everything. At this time, we have found no evidence these pieces were stolen. Documentation suggests they were legally purchased by Richard Blackwood in 1947 from a French museum that was liquidating assets to fund post-war reconstruction. If this documentation holds up to scrutiny, the tapestries belong to the current property owner, Elena Vasquez. The media frenzy intensified. Elena stopped answering her phone entirely, stopped reading news articles, stopped checking social media where strangers debated whether she deserved this windfall. The mill became a fortress, 24-hour security, climate-controlled tents erected over the storage pit, conservation teams working around the clock to assess and stabilize the tapestries. Dr. Chen coordinated everything. She'd taken a sabbatical from the university to oversee the project, became Elena's translator between the world of textile history and the practicalities of preservation and eventual sale. On day 12, they finished the initial count, 47 tapestries in total, 23 depicting religious scenes, 15 showing courtly life, 9 illustrating mythological stories, all woven between 1450 and 1580, all previously unknown to the art world, all in remarkably good condition considering their storage circumstances. The preliminary valuation made Elena sit down hard on the mill floor. Dr. Chen delivered the numbers with clinical precision, but her eyes showed the enormity of what she was saying. Conservative estimate, assuming authentication holds and ownership is confirmed, $365 million. More if certain pieces turn out to be by specific known master weavers. Less if international claims complicate sale. $365 million. The number was impossible, meaningless. Elena earned $32,000 a year when she had full-time work. This was 11,000 years of her current income. This was generational wealth. This was the kind of money that bought politicians and universities and buildings with your name on them. Elena thought about her eviction notice, about Jennifer's judgment, about David's assumption that she'd failed at everything, about every person who'd looked at her with pity or contempt when she'd announced she'd bought a condemned mill for $1. The vindication should have felt sweet. Instead, it felt terrifying, because this much money changed everything, changed who she was, changed how people saw her, changed what was expected from her. And Elena had no idea how to be the person who owned $365 million in tapestries. Mia adapted to the circus with surprising grace. The 9-year-old watched reporters from the car window, asked questions about conservation that made the textile experts smile, and continued with her homework as if life hadn't completely transformed. One evening, sitting in their apartment that Elena no longer had to leave, Mia looked up from her math worksheets. "Mama, what happens if the money goes away? If they decide the tapestries aren't ours?" Elena set down her own work, legal documents she was trying to understand. "Then we'll be exactly where we were before, together, figuring it out." "But people are being nice now." Mia's voice was small. Aunt Jennifer called. "Dad wants to have dinner. Everyone at school knows. What happens when the money goes away and people go back to how they were?" The question showed wisdom beyond 9 years. Mia had learned that kindness could be conditional, that people's treatment changed based on your value to them, that poverty made you invisible while wealth made you worthy of attention. "Baby, the people who are only nice now, they don't matter." Elena pulled her daughter close. "The people who mattered were nice before. Dr. Chen, Carl, and Tommy at the mill, your teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, they didn't need money to make them kind. But what if we lose the nice people when the money comes?" Mia's fear was specific and piercing. What if we become different and they don't like us anymore? Elena had no answer to that, because it was a real possibility. Wealth changed people. She'd seen it happen to others, seen how money created distance between relatives, between old friends, how it made every interaction transactional. "We'll try very hard not to change," she said finally. "And if we do, we'll change together. Deal?" "Deal." Mia returned to her homework, apparently satisfied. The provenance investigation took 6 weeks. Archival research across 3 countries. interviews with historians who specialized in World War II art movement, review of bills of sale and shipping manifests, and museum liquidation records. The FBI's final report arrived via email on a Tuesday morning. Elena opened it with hands that shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. The document was 50 pages of legal and historical analysis, but the conclusion was clear. Richard Blackwood had legally purchased the tapestries from the Musée de Cluny in Paris in 1947. The French museum, devastated by war and desperate for reconstruction funds, had sold pieces from their collection that were considered secondary holdings. The tapestries had been properly exported, properly documented, properly transferred. They were legally Elena's, all 47 pieces, all $365 million. Elena sat in the apartment that would be hers as long as she wanted it and felt nothing. Numbness where joy should have been. The magnitude of the news was too large to process. She owned art worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, could buy a house, could buy 100 houses, could send Mia to any college in the world, could retire and never work another day, could do anything, everything, and had no idea where to start. Dr. Chen helped navigate the next steps. The tapestries needed conservation work before they could be sold. Professional restoration that would take months and cost millions, but auction houses were already circling, sensing a once-in-a-generation sale. Sotheby's, Christie's, major institutions preparing bidding wars that would rewrite art market records. Elena hired lawyers, a team of them, specialists in art law and estate planning and tax strategy. They discussed trusts and foundations and charitable giving, explained how she could avoid taxes, protect assets, create legacies. Their hourly rates were more than she used to make in a week, but they assured her it would save millions in the long run. The sale was scheduled for 6 months out. Time to complete conservation, build marketing campaigns, coordinate international buyers. In the meantime, Elena had to decide what to do with her immediate life. The apartment, the mill, her relationship with family who'd judged her so harshly. Jennifer called, her voice careful. "I owe you an apology, a real one, not just words. I was wrong about the mill, about your decisions, about everything." "Yeah," Elena's voice was flat. "You were. I thought I was protecting you, protecting Mia. I thought you were making reckless choices that would hurt you both." Jennifer's pause was heavy. "I was judging you for being poor, pretending it was about responsibility, but really, I was just uncomfortable with your struggle." The honesty was startling. Elena had expected Jennifer to minimize, to excuse. Instead, her sister was taking actual accountability. "I don't know how to be rich," Elena admitted. "Don't know how to be the person everyone thinks I should be now. Part of me wants to buy a big house and hire staff and never work again. But another part is terrified that money will destroy whatever good things I still have." "Then maybe don't change everything at once," Jennifer suggested. "Take it slow. Figure out who you want to be with wealth instead of letting wealth define you." The advice was unexpectedly wise. Elena thanked her sister, ended the call, and sat in silence. Who did she want to be? What mattered beyond money? The answer came from Mia. The 9-year-old had been researching tapestries with the intensity she brought to everything. One evening, she presented Elena with a notebook filled with careful writing and printed images. "Mama, I've been learning about these. The tapestries we found. They tell stories about saints and heroes and regular people doing important things." Mia's voice was serious. "Museums put them behind glass where millions of people can see them, learn from them. If we sell them to private collectors, they'll go into houses where nobody sees them." Elena understood what her daughter was suggesting. "You think we should donate them?" "Some of them, maybe?" Mia chewed her lip. "Dr. Chen says museums can't afford to buy them all, but if we donated a few, if we let people see them and learn from them, that would matter, more than just money." Out of the mouths of children. Elena pulled Mia close, overwhelmed by her daughter's wisdom. "You're right. Let's talk to Dr. Chen about which pieces would do the most good in museums. The decision shifted everything. Elena announced she would donate 12 of the 47 tapestries to institutions that couldn't afford to purchase them. The Smithsonian would receive 3. The Musée de Cluny, which had originally owned the pieces, would receive 2 as restitution. Other museums in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia would each receive 1. The remaining 35 would be auctioned. More than enough to secure her and Mia's future. More than enough to prove she could be generous and practical. The response was overwhelming. Museum directors called to thank her. Art historians wrote articles praising her stewardship. Even the critics who'd initially judged her for buying the mill admitted she was handling the discovery with grace. But the moment that mattered most came from Carl. The man from the loading dock appeared at the apartment one evening, cleaned up and nervous. Elena invited him in, made coffee, listened as he spoke. Marcus told me once that he left the mill to you specifically because you do the right thing. He said his family had a history of choosing money over people, but he saw something different in you. Said you were like his sister, your grandmother, too stubborn to quit, too kind to let success corrupt you. Elena's eyes burned. Did he know what was in the mill? The tapestries? I think he suspected something was hidden there. His father had told him stories about items stored during the war, but Marcus never looked because he was afraid of what he'd find, afraid it was stolen property that would destroy his family's name. Carl paused. He left it for you because he trusted you to handle it right. And from what I'm seeing, he was correct. The auction happened on a perfect autumn day. Elena wore a dress Sophia helped her pick out, sat in a private box at Christie's, and watched as her tapestries sold one after another for prices that made no sense. The first piece went for $14 million, the second for $18 million. By the time the final gavel fell, the total exceeded $400 million, more than initial estimates because the market was hungry, because the story was compelling, because these pieces represented something lost and found. After fees and conservation costs and taxes and legal bills, Elena netted $290 million, enough to buy literally anything she wanted, enough to never worry about money again, enough to change her family's trajectory for generations. She bought a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable home in a good school district, set up college funds for Mia and her cousins, created a foundation to support single mothers facing poverty, donated to textile arts programs and museums, hired Carl and Tommy to manage security at a proper salary, kept Dr. Chen on retainer as an advisor, and she bought the mill, paid the cleanup costs, brought it up to code, transformed it into a community center focused on textile arts and job training, installed working looms where people could learn traditional weaving, created gallery space where the story of the tapestries could be told. On opening day, a year after finding the tapestries, Elena stood in the restored weaving floor and watched people file through, students examining the looms, artists sketching, families reading placards that explained what had happened here. Mia appeared beside her, taller now, growing into someone confident and kind. Grandma would have liked this, using a mill to help people instead of just making money. Yeah, Elena's voice was thick. She would have. They stood together in the space that had changed everything. This building everyone said she was crazy to buy. This condemned structure that held centuries of history and millions in treasure. This place that had chosen her as much as she'd chosen it. The last placard on the tour told their story. Elena had written it herself after months of consideration. In 2023, Elena Vasquez purchased this building for $1. She was mocked for the decision, told she was foolish, reckless, irresponsible. But sometimes the most valuable things appear worthless to those who've forgotten how to see potential. The tapestries hidden here for decades waited for someone who understood that broken things deserve restoration. that abandoned places hold stories worth preserving, that a single dollar invested with hope can change everything. This center stands as proof that you don't need wealth to make wise investments. You just need courage to look past the decay to the possibility beneath. Visitors read the words. Some photographed it. Others stood quietly, processing their own stories of judgment and redemption. As the sun set, casting golden light through the restored windows, Elena sat at one of the working looms. Her hands remembered the motions her grandmother had taught her as a child, warp and weft, thread by thread, building something beautiful from individual strands. Mia worked beside her, learning the rhythm. They wove together in comfortable silence, creating fabric that would become a gift for Dr. Chen, something simple and practical and made with love instead of obligation. "Mama?" Mia's voice was thoughtful. "When people ask how we got rich, what should I tell them?" Elena considered. "Tell them we took a chance on something everyone else thought was worthless, and we were right. But also lucky," Mia added. "We were lucky too." "Yeah, baby, we were lucky. But luck favors the people who show up, who do the work, who believe in possibility, even when everyone else sees failure." Elena's hands moved steadily, creating pattern from chaos. "We showed up." Through the window, the river reflected the sunset. The same river that had witnessed the mill's construction, its industrial heyday, its abandonment, its resurrection. Water that flowed constantly, carrying stories downstream to the ocean. Carl and Tommy arrived to lock up for the evening. They'd become friends, these three people thrown together by circumstance and Marcus Blackwood's strange faith. They talked about the day's visitors, about plans for expanding the programs, about the applications coming in from weavers who wanted to study here. Jennifer called, invited Elena and Mia to Sunday dinner. David texted about picking Mia up for their weekend together, his messages now carefully respectful. Sophia sent photos of wedding plans, asking Elena's opinion on venues. Life continued. Transformed, yes, but continuous. The Tapestries had changed their circumstances, but not their essence. Elena was still a mother, a sister, a daughter, still someone who fixed broken things and believed in second chances. The money just made it easier to help others do the same. Before leaving, Elena walked to the section of the weaving floor where the tapestries had been hidden. The pit was empty now, cleaned and covered with safety glass so visitors could see the space without danger. A single tapestry fragment remained, too damaged to restore or sell. Elena had framed it and mounted it here as a reminder. The fragment showed a woman at a loom. The weaver's face was turned toward the viewer, her expression content. Around her, threads of every color waited to be woven into something beautiful. The original artist had captured something essential about creation, about patience, about faith in the process. Below the frame, another placard. This tapestry fragment could not be saved, but its story remains. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones that teach us to keep weaving, to keep building, to keep faith in what we're creating, even when the pattern isn't yet clear. This weaver worked without knowing her art would last 6 centuries. She simply did her best with the threads she had. We honor her work by doing the same with ours. Mia took Elena's hand as they walked out of the mill. The October air was crisp and clean. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Their car waited in the parking lot, practical and paid off. Their house waited 20 minutes away, warm and safe. But Elena paused at the door, turned back to look at the building that had changed everything. This monument to industrial decline that had held such unexpected treasure. This place everyone dismissed that had restored her faith in herself. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus Blackwood, to his father Richard, to the unknown French museum curator who'd sold these pieces to save his institution, to Bill and Helen Crawford, whose story had been woven into Elena's own through the strange coincidence of discovery narratives, to everyone who'd taken chances on worthless things and been proven right. The mill stood solid against the evening sky, its windows glowing with light, its purpose renewed. Inside, looms that had been silent for decades now hummed with student weavers learning an ancient art. The building lived again, not as an industrial facility, but as a place where transformation happened thread by thread. Elena climbed into the car beside Mia. They drove home through streets that looked different now, or maybe Elena was the one who'd changed. Either way, the view was better. Full of possibility, full of hope, full of the particular peace that came from knowing that sometimes, when everyone told you something was worthless, they were wrong. And sometimes, when you invested your last dollar in an impossible dream, the universe conspired to prove that courage was the best currency of all. At home, Elena made dinner. They ate at their modest table in their comfortable kitchen. Mia did homework. Elena reviewed plans for the mill's next workshop series. The television played in the background. The heater kicked on against the October chill. It was ordinary, perfectly, beautifully ordinary. The kind of life she'd dreamed about during the desperate months. The kind of stability that money could buy but couldn't create. That came from knowing who you were regardless of your bank balance. Before bed, Mia hugged her tight. "I'm glad you bought the mill, Mama. Even if there hadn't been tapestries, even if it stayed empty, I'm glad you did something brave." Elena held her daughter, feeling the solid weight of this person she'd created and raised and protected through everything. "Me too, baby, me too." That night, Elena dreamed of weavers. Centuries of women and men sitting at looms, creating beauty from thread and patience. Their work surviving wars and floods and abandonment, waiting in darkness for the moment when someone would uncover them and say, "This matters. This is worth saving." She woke before dawn, the dream still vivid, walked to her home office and sat at the desk she'd bought specifically for this purpose, pulled out paper and pen, began writing a letter to Mia to be opened when her daughter turned 18. "Dear Mia, by the time you read this, you'll be an adult facing your own choices, your own moments when everyone tells you something is worthless and you have to decide whether to believe them or trust your instinct. I'm writing this now while the memory is fresh, to tell you what I learned from a condemned building and 47 tapestries. Value isn't always visible. Sometimes the most precious things are hidden under layers of decay, waiting for someone with the courage to look deeper. You come from a line of weavers, your great-great-grandmother, your grandmother, the unknown artists who created the tapestries that changed our lives. We all understood the same truth, that you create beauty thread by thread, that you can't rush the process, that patience and skill and faith in the pattern eventually produce something worth preserving. When you face your impossible choices, when people mock you for believing in potential they can't see, remember the mill. Remember that your mother bought a condemned building for $1 and found $365 million in treasure, not because she was smart or lucky, because she was willing to look at what everyone else dismissed. Be that person, the one who sees value where others see waste, who invests in possibility when everyone counsels caution, who weaves beauty from the broken threads life hands you. The money we have now, it's wonderful, but it's not the treasure. You are the treasure. The courage you showed sleeping in a car, the kindness you maintained when life was hard, the wisdom you spoke when you suggested donating tapestries so others could learn from them. That's what I'm most proud of, not the wealth. You. All my love, Mama. Elena sealed the letter, addressed it, placed it in the safe deposit box with other important documents, watched the sunrise through her office window. Another day beginning, another chance to choose who to be with the resources she'd been given. The mill's phone rang at 8, the first workshop of the day beginning, students arriving to learn skills that connected them to centuries of human creativity. Elena answered questions, solved problems, coordinated schedules, the same work she'd done as a waitress, really. Helping people, facilitating connections, making sure things ran smoothly, just with better pay and surrounded by art instead of hash browns. At noon, she picked Mia up from school. They stopped for lunch at the diner where Elena used to work. Her former boss greeted her with genuine warmth, no resentment about the wealth gap that now existed between them. They talked about his kids, about menu changes, about the rhythms of daily life that continued regardless of bank balances. As they left, the owner called out, "Elena, I'm proud of you, not because of the money, because you didn't let the money change who you are." That's rare. In the car, Mia asked why that made Elena cry. "Because he sees me, the real me, not the version the news reports or the version people imagine, just me. That's the greatest treasure of all." They drove to the mill, to the looms that hummed with activity, to the students creating beauty thread by thread, to the place that had started as everyone's punchline and become Elena's greatest triumph. Not because of tapestries worth hundreds of millions, because she'd taken a chance on something worthless and proven that value was often hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to look beyond the obvious decay to the possibility beneath. The weaver in the damaged tapestry fragment smiled down from her frame, 6 centuries old and still teaching, still reminding everyone who saw her that the work matters more than the recognition, that creation is its own reward, that sometimes the most important stories are the ones woven so carefully they survive everything time throws at them. Elena sat at a loom beside her students, picked up the shuttle, began the ancient rhythm of thread and patience, creating something that would outlast her, that would carry forward the story of courage and restoration and the treasure that almost no one saw. $1, one decision, one condemned building, one chance to prove that broken things choose who fixes them, and sometimes the choosing is mutual. The loom clicked and hummed, the pattern emerged thread by thread, and in a textile mill that everyone said should have been demolished, beauty was being born again in the hands of people who understood that the most valuable treasures are often the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to invest their last dollar in an impossible dream. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening, 18 months after the auction. Elena was helping Mia with a history project when her attorney's number flashed on the screen. She almost didn't answer, comfortable enough now to let calls wait, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Vasquez, we have a situation." Gerald Morrison's voice carried that careful neutrality lawyers used when delivering complicated news. "A woman in Paris has come forward, claiming her grandmother owned 3 of the tapestries you sold. She has documentation that may predate the museum's sale to Richard Blackwood." Elena's stomach dropped. The fear she'd carried for 18 months, the nightmare that woke her at 3 in the morning, had materialized. Someone was challenging ownership. Someone wanted the tapestries back, or more likely wanted the money from their sale. What kind of documentation? Elena's voice stayed level despite the panic clawing at her throat. Letters from her grandmother describing the tapestries in detail, photographs showing them hanging in their Paris apartment in 1938, a will that specifically bequeaths them to her descendants. Morrison paused. "She's hired a very aggressive firm. They're threatening litigation unless you agree to mediation." How much does she want? Because this was always about money. Elena had learned that wealth attracted claims the way light attracted moths. Everyone suddenly remembered loans they'd made, investments they'd discussed, promises that had been whispered. She's asking for $47 million, the value of those 3 specific pieces, plus interest, plus compensation for emotional distress. Morrison's tone suggested he thought the claim was questionable, but she has enough documentation that a judge might let it proceed to trial, which means years of litigation, massive legal fees, and uncertainty. Mia looked up from her textbook, reading the expression on Elena's face with the intuition children developed when their parents tried to hide worry. "Mama, is everything okay?" Elena nodded, forced a smile, mouthed "work stuff," and stepped into the hallway. "What do you recommend?" "We investigate her claim thoroughly. If the documentation is legitimate, if her grandmother truly owned those tapestries and they were taken without proper compensation, then ethically we should consider returning the money. Morrison's voice softened. I know that's not what you want to hear, but your reputation matters more than any individual payment. Elena thought about the foundation she'd created, the mill that now employed 37 people, the scholarships funding textile arts education, the life she'd built on the presumption that the money was legitimately hers. What happens to everything I've committed if I have to pay $47 million? Your net worth can handle it. You'd have to liquidate some investments, maybe scale back expansion plans, but you wouldn't lose the mill or the foundation. Morrison paused. This is the price of massive wealth, Elena. People come out of the woodwork. Some claims are legitimate, some are opportunistic. We navigate each one carefully, set up the mediation. Elena heard herself saying it from a distance, as if someone else was making the decision. If her claim is real, we make it right. If it's not, we fight. But I won't drag this out for years just to avoid potential payment. After the call ended, Elena stood in the hallway of her comfortable home and felt the old fear return, the sense that she didn't deserve this wealth, that the universe would correct its error and take everything back, that she'd end up exactly where she started, but with the added humiliation of having risen and fallen publicly. Mia appeared in the doorway, too perceptive for her 10 years. Someone wants money. Someone says the tapestries weren't really ours. Maybe. Elena pulled her daughter close. We don't know yet, but even if they're right, even if we have to pay, we'll be okay. We've already given away more than this woman is asking for. What's ours is still ours. But people will say you were wrong, that you should have known. Mia's fear was specific and cutting. They'll say you stole art and sold it and kept money that wasn't yours. The accusation landed hard because it was exactly what Elena feared, not the financial loss, but the moral judgment, being cast as a thief who'd profited from someone else's loss, having her moment of triumph reframed as exploitation. Then we'll prove them wrong by how we handle this. Elena's voice steadied as she spoke, finding conviction in the words. We'll investigate fairly. We'll pay if payment is owed. And we'll do it with grace because that's who we are. The mediation took place in a conference room in Boston, neutral territory. The French claimant was 60-something, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to wealth. Marguerite Dubois introduced herself with a firm handshake and eyes that assessed Elena with open curiosity. I expected someone older. Marguerite's English carried a slight accent. The American who stumbled into fortune, the lucky woman everyone writes about. I expected someone angrier. Elena met her gaze evenly. Someone demanding rather than negotiating. Anger is expensive. It clouds judgment. Marguerite settled into her chair with the ease of someone who'd attended thousands of such meetings. I prefer clarity. You have something that belonged to my family. I would like fair compensation. This seems straightforward. If it belonged to your family. Elena's lawyer, Morrison, spread documents across the conference table. The Musée de Cluny's records show clear title. Legal sale in 1947. No claims filed for 76 years. Why now? Marguerite's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Claire Rousseau, responded smoothly. Because my client only recently discovered that her grandmother's tapestries had survived the war. She believed them destroyed when their apartment was ransacked by Nazi forces in 1940. She had no reason to search for them until she saw news coverage of Mrs. Vasquez's discovery. The next hour was spent reviewing documents. Marguerite's grandmother, Isabelle Dubois, had owned a textile import business in Paris. Her personal collection had included dozens of tapestries acquired over decades. The 3 pieces Marguerite now claimed showed specific characteristics that matched family photographs and written descriptions. But the Musée de Cluny's records told a different story. In 1942, facing Nazi occupation and desperate for funds, Isabelle Dubois had sold her collection to the museum for safekeeping and immediate cash. The sale had been legal, properly documented, witnessed by 3 parties. The museum had then sold those same pieces to Richard Blackwood 5 years later, equally legally. Your grandmother sold them. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. Under duress, yes, wartime creates impossible choices. But she sold them legitimately. The museum didn't steal them. She sold them for 1/10 their value. Marguerite's composure cracked slightly. Because she was Jewish and terrified and had no leverage, the museum exploited her desperation. That sale was coerced. Elena saw the truth in those words. Isabelle Dubois had sold treasures for survival money, had watched her life's collection vanish into institutional storage, had died, according to Marguerite's account, believing those pieces had been destroyed, never knowing they'd survived, never imagining they'd resurface decades later worth hundreds of millions. The moral calculus was complicated. Legally, Elena owned the Tapestries. Every sale in the chain had been documented and proper, but morally, Isabelle Dubois had been forced to sell under conditions that made true consent questionable, had received a fraction of fair value because she had no choice but to accept what was offered. I want to propose something. Elena heard herself speaking before fully forming the thought. You're asking for 47 million, the value of 3 tapestries at auction. But what if instead of payment, I gave you ownership of 3 comparable pieces? Marguerite's eyebrows rose. I don't follow. Elena gestured at the photographs spread across the table. These 3 specific tapestries were sold at auction. I no longer own them, but I still own artifacts from the discovery, textile fragments, tools from the mill, documentation of the process. What if I transferred ownership of items worth 47 million in appraised value? You could sell them or keep them. Either way, you'd have fair compensation without requiring me to liquidate investments. Morrison's expression showed surprise and calculation. That's creative. He turned to Marguerite's attorney. Would your client consider such an arrangement? Marguerite leaned forward, studying Elena with new interest. Why would you do this? You could fight me for years, probably win in court. Why offer compromise? Because your grandmother was forced to sell treasures to survive. Because the law might say every transaction was proper, but we both know she was exploited. Elena's voice stayed level. I can't return her tapestries. They're owned by museums and private collectors now, but I can make sure her descendant receives fair value. That's the right thing to do. Silence filled the conference room. The attorneys exchanged glances. Marguerite's composed expression wavered, showing something deeper, grief perhaps, or recognition that justice, even delayed, was possible. The items you're offering, I would want to see an inventory, verified appraisals. Marguerite's tone had shifted from adversarial to negotiating, and I would want something else. The story, documentation of how you found the tapestries, what you discovered, about their history. My grandmother's pieces are part of a larger narrative. I want that narrative preserved. Done. Elena felt the tension in her chest loosen. Morrison can coordinate the inventory. We have extensive documentation of the discovery process. I'll make copies available. They spent another hour working through details. Which artifacts would be transferred, how appraisals would be verified, the timeline for completing the transaction. By the end, Marguerite's initial demand had transformed into something that felt less like a lawsuit and more like a restoration of family legacy. As they prepared to leave, Marguerite approached Elena privately. The others had stepped out, leaving them alone in the conference room with its view of Boston Harbor. I was prepared to hate you. Marguerite's voice was quiet. The woman who found my grandmother's treasures and sold them for fortune. But you're not what I expected. I'm just someone who took a chance on a worthless building. Elena met her eyes. Your grandmother took chances too. Built a business, collected art, survived the war. We're not so different. She died believing everything was lost. Marguerite's eyes glistened. died thinking the Nazis had destroyed her life's work. If she'd known the tapestries survived, if she'd known they would eventually be found and appreciated, it would have given her peace. Then let's make sure her story is told. Elena felt the rightness of this settling into her bones. The mill has gallery space dedicated to the tapestry's history. We can include your grandmother's story. Make sure people know that these treasures came at a human cost. Marguerite nodded slowly. That would honor her memory more than money ever could. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks later. Elena transferred ownership of textile fragments, historical documents, and photographs appraised at $48 million. Marguerite donated most of it to French museums, keeping only pieces that had direct connection to her grandmother's original collection. The documentation of Isabelle Dubois's life became part of the mill's permanent exhibition. Elena told Mia about the resolution over dinner that evening, explained how sometimes doing the right thing meant giving up what you were legally entitled to keep, how justice was more complicated than ownership papers and bills of sale. "Are you sad?" Mia asked. "About giving away so much?" "No." Elena realized she meant it. "I'm relieved. That woman's grandmother lost everything trying to survive. The least I can do is make sure her descendants receive fair compensation. That's not loss, that's balance. But people will say you were naive, that you should have fought harder." Mia's fear mirrored Elena's own internalized voices, the ones that said generosity was weakness and compromise was defeat. Let them say it. Elena's smile was genuine. "I know who I am. I know what matters. Money is just money. Reputation built on doing right things, that's forever." That night, Elena updated the letter she'd written to Mia for her 18th birthday, added a new section about the French claimant and the settlement, about how wealth created opportunities for generosity that poverty made impossible, how the true measure of character was what you did when you had power and choices. The mill's exhibition opening featured Isabelle Dubois's story prominently, photographs of her Paris shop, copies of letters describing her collection, documentation of the wartime sale that had been both legal and coerced. Marguerite attended, gave a speech about her grandmother's legacy, thanked Elena publicly for ensuring that history was preserved alongside the art. The media coverage was extensive but different from the initial discovery stories, less sensationalism about found treasure, more thoughtful reflection on art, ownership, and the complicated ethics of wartime transactions. Elena did interviews where she talked about responsibility that came with wealth, about how finding treasure was just the beginning. How you handled it determined whether you were truly worthy. Jennifer called after watching one of the interviews. "I'm proud of you, really proud, not because you found millions, because you gave millions away and felt good about it. That's rare. I learned from the best failures." Elena's voice held warmth. "You were right to worry about me making impulsive decisions, but sometimes impulse and intuition are the same thing. In the mill's weaving room, students created tapestries that would never be worth millions, but mattered just as much. Stories woven thread by thread, patterns emerging from patience and skill. Beauty created by hands that understood the work was its own reward." Elena sat among them, her own hands moving through the familiar rhythm. She'd started weaving again after the settlement, finding peace in the ancient practice, creating something that would outlast her, that carried forward the story of courage, generosity, and the understanding that true wealth wasn't measured in auction prices. $1 had bought her a condemned building. 47 tapestries had brought her fortune. 48 million in settlement had bought her peace. But the real treasure had always been the same, the courage to see value where others saw waste, and the wisdom to share what she found with those who'd lost even more. The loom clicked its steady rhythm, the pattern grew thread by thread, and in a textile mill that everyone said should have been demolished, Elena Vasquez wove her legacy into something that would last far longer than any bank balance ever could. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.